Sweet like the smell of honeysuckle in the summer sun. Sweet like the taste of rock candy crushed between the teeth. Sweet like the touch of a baby's skin beneath your fingertips. Yes, the archer's life was sweet. Never was the aim of his arrow more true, his sense of direction more succinct, his adoration more complete, but something was missing. An empty spot existing just outside his line of sight, unspoken, intangible, and roaming the edges of his essence. Like an itch that wasn't there, with no specific connection to his otherwise well-ordered life, it lingered, always present, but never quite real. One day, restless, the archer went out for a walk. He had spent the morning stringing bows in preparation for an upcoming event. While the man's life was nothing if not stable, well-ordered, and pleasant, archery tournaments were not without stress. After all, how can one enjoy the placid surface of a tranquil sea without the occasional storm to roil the waters? Meanwhile, his outing had casually carried him to the grounds where the competition was soon to commence. The act of watching other archers honing their skills both relaxed and stimulated him, so the man paused, watching the flight of arrow after arrow arching gracefully, cleaving the air, and landing in and around a colorful cluster of red and white concentric circles. It's often said that the mechanism of fate is a world unto itself. Idle accidents create catastrophic events. Chance encounters yield lifelong relationships, and toddlers, left alone, wander out onto active archery ranges. To his horror, as the astonished bowman watched, a small child suddenly appeared at the edge of the range, chasing a yellow balloon erratically propelled by a playful and capricious wind straight towards the treacherous collection of targets. And just as the child finally caught the balloon, raising it above his head in triumph, an arrow pierced his leg, pinning him to the ground as he shrieked, projectile vomited, and collapsed. Momentarily paralyzed, the archer was compelled to help the stricken child, but he hesitated, perhaps in fear of an unrelenting hail of arrows, perhaps anticipating the arrival of the child's caretaker, or perhaps it was fate. Regardless, before the man could breach his flaccid immobility, a fluid spirit appeared as if out of nowhere. A younger man, dashing, mercurial, and fearless, appearing at the child's side, first shouting his piercing admonition, instantly ending the avalanche of arrows, then scooping the boy up and spiriting him to safety. The archer was transfixed. Never had he encountered such bold and unfettered bravery. It must be applauded, admired, revered, but as quickly as he appeared, the handsome young man was gone, leaving the older bowman eager, open, and aching. A few months later, fate intervened again. Returning home from a luncheon engagement, the archer rounded a corner as a dramatic scene played out before him. Apparently, a horse pulling a carriage had become spooked. The animal bolted, and before the driver could regain control, the small coach had collided with a young woman crossing the street. As the archer looked on, the woman, covered in dirt from the muddy roadway, sprawled across its surface unconscious, her arms and legs askew, and her neck jutting out at an odd and precarious angle. A small crowd had gathered around the lifeless woman, but before anyone could come to her aid, the young healer suddenly appeared again. Pushing his way through the crowd, he immediately knelt at the young woman's side. Then, after closely observing the ominous angle of her neck, the man removed a glove from his right hand. Perhaps it was a trick of the light, as the evening sun ducked behind a cloud, spraying rays in awesome, erratic, and elegant directions. But As the man slowly and self-consciously raised his arm into the air, his open and splayed palm arching up, around, and down somehow seemed to emit a faint and eerie glow, all but obscured in the shadowy dusk of the evening air. Suddenly, as the healer's hand gently came to rest upon the injured woman's neck, her body was jolted back to life. Tenderly and with great care, he helped the afflicted woman, her neck now seemingly normal, first into a seated position, then upright and back onto her feet. Holding her securely, as the small crowd looked on in dazed admiration, the healer slowly led the maiden off the street towards the office of a nearby physician. With no hesitation, the archer approached the circumspect couple, braced the injured woman from the opposite side, and helped them into the doctor's waiting room. The passage of time soon found the archer and healer together. The older man's attraction to his younger companion had been reciprocated, allowing the pair to live together in harmony. Employed day to day as a shipping clerk, the healer, youthful and inexperienced, found himself overshadowed by his renowned and worldly comrade. And while the man was yet to fully harness the curative powers of his gift, a restoring and healing touch, all but magical in its therapeutic potence, this near mystical force was not unnoticed by his older companion. And while the archer's acumen with bow and arrow was ardently acclaimed far and wide, curiously, this highly lauded skill was not his true gift, for the bowman was also possessed with his own mystical power, his light. The archer's light, not unlike the sun shining on seeds carelessly cast upon fallow ground, enabled those few blessed by the glow of this radiant force to blossom, thrive, and flourish. And of course, the current beneficiary of this miraculous light was his youthful and not yet fully invigorated young ward. Soon the hope engendered by the archer's light was indeed fulfilled, enabling confidence, growth, and spiritual awakening in the young healer. Focusing on the restoration and recovery of children afflicted with grievous and ghastly conditions, the preternatural caretaker flourished, finding meaning and self-worth in ways he never imagined. But, unfortunately, as he did, the healer slowly drifted away from his beloved archer, the animator of his fulfillment. And of course, the result of this growing emotional detachment was a reciprocal sense of need in his partner. The more satisfied and self-sufficient the young healer became, the less he depended upon his companion, whose unwanted insecurity mushroomed in reply. As an unaccustomed yearning gradually consumed the older man, he reached out again and again, receiving little or no reassurance in return. No offense was meant by this inadvertent exclusion. The younger man was simply consumed with passion and success. As a result, within their relationship, harmony mutated into tension, and disaffection swelled. Slowly growing apart, they no longer found common interest, quarreling over insignificance, bickering over trivialities, until, "I hate archery." This was the definitive phrase slamming the door on an especially spiteful argument. The sentiment expressed in this unexpected outburst was one the young healer had felt for some time, but the loyalty and affection he had for his older companion had long prompted silence. But things change. After all, arrows were nothing if not agents of mayhem, destruction, and death, and he was a healer, a calling diametrically opposed to their existence. As a caretaker, loathing the mechanism of slaughter was an all but prime directive, a moral obligation, a sacred trust. Meanwhile, the archer found himself confronted with other unforeseen shifts in the cultural landscape. Earlier, in the man's youth, a new implement of conflict had been introduced: the musket. At first, These primitive firearms were seen as a curious and unreliable novelty. The weapon's potential for destruction was obvious, but it could just as easily explode, maiming or disfiguring its user. Consequently, the flintlock was usually dismissed as a serious instrument of war. But, again, things change. Reports of foreign combat in which a brigade of bowmen were wiped out by a much smaller platoon of musketeers recently reached the Archer city, leading to obvious and ominous predictions about the future of modern warfare. As a result, archery was increasingly dismissed as an anachronism, a holdover from an earlier era, relegated to sportsman status and even degraded as novelty. The grand pageants around which the bowman had built his career had declined into garish sideshows, vulgar events in which he more and more refused to participate. But the archer's career had served him well. Years before, the fruits of his success had allowed the man to build a gilded tower, removed from the constant trifles and distractions of city life, a sanctum sanctorum to which he and his young companion often retreated, but now frequently found him in isolation. And in this solitary state, with no one's counsel but his own, the archer made a curious decision, turning the uppermost floor of his citadel into a hall of mirrors, an echo chamber reflecting nothing but himself, and, as he posed with his bows and arrows, desperately seeking to recapture the glory of a fast-fading era, the bowman somehow came to see his own reflection as a target. Seemingly secure within this distorted, self-imposed field of vision, he summoned all the resentment, jealousy, impotence, and rage he viewed as inappropriate within the context of everyday life, turning this negative energy into arrows of emotion, shafts of bitterness and bile, which he then aimed at himself. And of course, over time, such self-inflicted wounds could yield but a single commodity, the foul fruit of malignance. But as the ailing archer's condition, both physical and emotional, declined, a strange thing happened. When the older man turned away from archery, his passion, while slowly succumbing to sickness, the young healer suddenly saw him in a different light. While the dynamic of their early relationship had changed, healing, the core value of the caretaker's being, found relevance and new meaning in their connection. In reciprocation, like a dying star going nova just before it winks out forever, the archer's light, blasting straight into the spiritual center of his young companion's soul, became a beacon of megawatt proportions. Finding each other again, their relationship not only bloomed anew, it flourished with a power and intensity unseen even in the early days of their courtship. In recent time, as archery no longer consumed his passion, nothing was more precious to the older man than the care and consideration of his inattentive partner. But now, as the ailing archer's need ballooned, the healer's attention returned, concentrated on his partner, unexpectedly renewing the bowman's vitality. Suddenly available for long, soul-searching walks, filled with profound observance and conversation, the archer used his light to illuminate and revere every corner of his companion's psyche, praising his work with children, glorifying his tireless and unselfish spirit, and extolling the healer's long-stated commitment to serving society. As the archer's light radiated into his inner being, the healer never felt more valued or appreciated, at the same time enabling his stricken companion to bask in the glory of his own reflected light. But sadly, the malaise generated by the archer's decline was far too entrenched, and the vibrance resulting from the couple's renewed connection was all too brief. After a few short weeks of unbelievable bliss, the ailing archer succumbed to his illness, leaving the stunned healer staring into the infinite emptiness of a vast and unending nothing. Replaced by the utter void of a bottomless black forever, the archer's brilliant light winked out, leaving his companion more alone, more introspective, and more devastated than he ever imagined possible. The healer still seeks his lost soul.